more like a pâte sucrée. Sucrée is in sugar. It has more sugar, so it has a nice cookie-like texture. But what we found is we could actually get rid of the whole rigmarole you usually do for tart doughs with the rolling and the chilling and the yada
You mean
yada.
the fun part?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And we're going to make this nice and simple. So here we have 1 1/3 cups of all-purpose flour. To this, we're going to add 5 tablespoons of sugar, which obviously will make the dough sweet, but it also makes it have a nice, crisp, firm texture. A little bit of salt, so 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And finally, we're going to add the melted butter. This will not only make it easy to pat the dough into the pan right away, but the melted butter will coat the individual grains of flour so they don't make a tough pie dough. It'll make it nice and tender. So you just want to mix this together, make sure it's nice and evenly combined, and that is as easy as it gets. So now I'm going to take about 2/3 of the dough. I'm going to pat it into the bottom of this 9-inch tart pan. So what I like to do is just sprinkle this evenly over the bottom of the pie dough. And now I'm just going to start to press it in with my fingers. All right, so you want to get it as even as possible. And then I'll take the rest of this dough. I'm just going to go around the edges and place the dough evenly. Make sure I have enough all the way around the edge of the tart pan. Just take your time and just make sure it's nice and flush to the side of the pan, going through all the little scalloped edges. All right, so we can put this right into the oven. We're going to bake it at 350 degrees for about half an hour, but of course we'll rotate it halfway through. So this was in the oven for 30 to 35 minutes, and you can tell it's done because it has a nice, even golden tone.
And it didn't shrink either.
That's right. All right, so now we're going to turn our attention to the apples. And of course, we tested different kinds of apples, but we loved Golden Delicious because they were the same year-round and they're always available. And they tend to hold their shape, which is good for the apples on top.
Okay.
So I have 10 apples here. Half of it is going to be for that puree, and the other half are going to be pretty ones for the top. Each apple makes exactly 16 slices. So here in a 12-inch skillet, we're going to melt a tablespoon of butter over medium heat. All right, so that butter is nice and melted. Now we're going to add the apples. And we're also going to add just a little bit of water. This is a tablespoon of water, and this will help create a little bit of steam so that the apples get a little bit translucent and pliable. So while those apples were cooking, I took some apricot preserves. This is 1/2 cup of apricot preserves, and I put it in the microwave to make it nice and fluid. And now I'm straining out the nice smooth part of the preserves away from the solids. And this is a trick we borrowed from Julia Child. She did this in her recipe. I'm going to take about 3 tablespoons of the strained preserves out, and then the rest we're going to put right into the filling. Make it nice and flavorful. It really brightens up the apple flavor. So these apples have been cooking for about 4 minutes. And they look pretty good. Ooh, they smell good. So now we're going to spread these apples out onto the plate and let them cool. So now we're going to move our attention to the apples that we're going to break down to make that flavorful pureed filling. We're going to add 2 tablespoons of butter back to the skillet. Put it over medium heat. All right, so that butter is nicely melted. Now we're going to take the rest of these apples, the other half of them, add them to the pan. We're going to really cook them down to a nice mush. So evenness doesn't really matter here.
Is mush a culinary term
It
that
is.
Julia used to use?
It's very fancy. We're going to add just a little bit of salt. This is a 1/4 teaspoon salt. And of course, the rest of this apricot preserve puree. So this is the rest of the strained apricot preserves and the solids. We're going to stir this together. And now we're going to cover the pan and really let these apples cook down to they're nice and soft, and we can mash them up. And that'll take about 10 minutes.
Okay.
All right, so this second batch of apples has been cooking for about 10 minutes, and you can see they're really starting to break down, which is perfect because we're going to mash them to a nice puree. We're going to do this right in the skillet while they continue to cook. And you're going to cook and mash for about 5 minutes or so until you get a nice thick puree that measures 2 cups. All right, so we've cooked this down and mashed it down to a nice thick silky puree. And by driving off all that moisture, we're also helping preventing the bottom crust from getting too soggy. I'm going to take this puree and I'm going to spoon it right into the bottom of the tart shell. So now I'm just going to take this offset spatula and smooth the puree out to a nice even layer. All right, and now it's time for the exciting part, the best part of this tart, arranging the pretty apples on top. We're just going to start by placing the apples, and of course there's the outside and the inside, and the outside's a little bit wider, so we're going to put the outside up. We're just going to shingle them around.
Why do I have a feeling I'm going to be here for quite a while?
It doesn't take that long, and believe it or not, this takes a lot less time than if you didn't par-cook the apples. These, tend to stay in place when you push them into the puree, and because they're flexible, they curve really nicely around. So you can see I'm just overlapping the slices a little bit. I'm going to really press them in against one another so there's no gaps. Not shabby looking. And I'm going to use these smaller pieces because they fit nicely right in the middle to make that final little rosette.
You can't get another one in there.
Yeah, I
Come
don't know
on.
that I can. No, I'm going to do it actually. Ta-da!
Very nice job.
All right, so obviously we need to bake this tart. We're going to do it on the lower rack of a 350-degree oven for about half an hour. So this tart has been in the oven for 30 minutes. Oh, that smell of apple is delicious.
Doesn't look bad either.
No,
I
it
have to
doesn't.
say.
Now, if you could please shut the door and turn the broiler on, that'd be great. All right, so now the tart is baked through, the apples are nice and soft, but we wanted them to get a little bit more brown. So remember, we reserved the strained apricot puree, and I heated it up in the microwave so it's nice and fluid. And I'm going to brush this over the top, and that'll get some nice browning on the top. One thing to note when you're brushing this over the tart is that you don't want to get any puree on the tart pan itself
It
in the
burns?
crust. Yeah, it'll burn and it'll help the tart stick, which is not great. All right, so now we're going to run this tart under the broiler for a couple minutes to get it nice and golden.
I mean,
voila.
okay, for this season of America's Test Kitchen, you get the Blue Ribbon Prize for the best looking dessert.
Yeah, this is gorgeous. And now it's time to eat it. So I'm going to show you a real quick way to unmold a tart with a can of tomatoes. This is a nice big size can. We're going to
Are they crushed tomatoes or whole tomatoes?
It doesn't matter. And of course, you can just let it fall away. So now take the tart off the tart bottom. Thank you very much. So I'm going to take this nice long offset spatula and I'm going to slide it between the crust and the tart pan bottom. And I'm just going to slide it all the way underneath the tart to make sure it's all loosened. And then, using the tart pan bottom to help me lift the tart up safely, I'm going to transfer it to a cake platter. May I serve you a slice?
You may serve me a large slice. Oof, that looks good.
There you are.
Oh,
That is gorgeous.
yes. Oh.
Oh, that nice clean flavor of apple.
The first thing I noticed was the crust was incredibly tender. Because very often you dig into this, it's soggy or it's tough, it's hard to get your fork through it. And also the fruit is very bright, everything's light.
Perfectly done.
You should start a bakery. I'll show up every day. So the secret to a great French apple tart aux pommes started with the crust. It was melted butter, 5 tablespoons of sugar, pat in the pan crust, nice and tender, pre-baked it. Meanwhile, we took the apples, cooked them a little bit of water just to get them tender for the top. The rest of the apples, cooked them down and mashed them right in the skillet. Assembled the tart, put them in the oven for about half an hour or so, and coated them with a little bit of that reserved apricot preserve, and then put them under the broiler for a few minutes to finish. So from America's Test Kitchen to your kitchen, a blast from the past, a tarte aux pommes or French apple tart. You can get this recipe, all the recipes from this season, our equipment ratings, taste tests, and watch select episodes of this show, all at our website, which is americastestkitchen.com. Terrific job, monumental job.